Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Serrett.
On this episode, tracking the movements of Lee Harvey Oswald in the final months and weeks before the JFK assassination.
The CIA sent a tape up to Dallas the night of the assassination. Supposedly one of these tapes they had of Oswald in the Russian consulate. The FBI agents hear it, and they write a memo to Hoover saying, "We just interrogated Oswald, and this voice on the tape does not correspond to the guy we heard. So therefore, we don't think this is Oswald."
If you suspect you have unwanted paranormal activity in your home or business, you need to call Paranormal Contractors, a division of crime and trauma scene cleaners. 1-866-724-0800. 1-866-724-0800. Check out their YouTube channel, Paranormal Contractors, for things that go bump in the night.
Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Serrett. Pursuing the truth wherever it leads. Exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites. Revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard Serrett.
James DiEugenio is back with more information on Lee Harvey Oswald, including his supposed trip to the Russian embassy in Mexico, where he was allegedly trying to get a visa to get back to Russia by way of Cuba, and this is supposedly evidence that he was making plans to flee after he killed JFK. And this is all crucial in propping up the official narrative that he was in fact the gunman. The other thing Jim will discuss is the mail-order murder weapon. Wait till you hear Jim unravel this piece of mythology. And we'll also get a visit from Jim DiEugenio from Paranormal Contractors.
Tonight, we're going to look at Oswald's time in Mexico City. And according to the Warren Commission, Lee Harvey Oswald traveled to Mexico City in the fall of 1963 in search of a visa for travel to Cuba and the Soviet Union. He apparently failed in that effort, returned to Dallas, where 7 weeks later, he shot President Kennedy, supposedly. Allegations of a Cuban or Soviet conspiracy based on events and stories related to this visit bloomed in the aftermath of the assassination. They were apparently instrumental in the creation of the Warren Commission, and over the years more and more has trickled out regarding a trip which ultimately remains enigmatic. And here, to sort out that little incident in Mexico City, is James DiEugenio, co-founder of two organizations, the Citizens for Truth about the Kennedy assassination and the Coalition on Political Assassinations, and is the co-editor of The Assassinations, a book on the deaths of JFK, MLK, RFK, and Malcolm X. He's the author of the recently published second edition of Destiny Betrayed, JFK, Cuba, and the Garrison case. James DiEugenio, how are you again, my friend?
Good evening, Richard.
Let's dive right in. The fall of 1963, 7 weeks prior to the assassination, Oswald allegedly goes down to Mexico City, traveling there with the express purpose, we are told, of obtaining a travel visa to Cuba. So, set the stage for us. What, according to the official version, the Warren Commission version, what happens when Oswald gets there?
Well, this is actually one of the most important chapters in my book, and it's a very, very interesting episode in Oswald's life because you said he was trying to get a visa to Cuba. That's not exactly correct, okay? He was trying to get what they called an in-transit visa to go to Russia from Cuba, okay? And this is one of the really big problems with the Warren Commission is they never really explained, why Oswald was there and the fact that he could have done what he wanted to do, which is eventually get to Russia, by doing what he did when he first defected. I guess the best way to explain this is to, first, let's tell your listeners what the Warren Commission says Oswald did. In the latter part of September, first Ruth Paine comes to New Orleans to pick up Marina. Oswald then, according to the Warren Commission, goes to Houston, although the Warren Commission cannot explain how he got to Houston. Then he picks a bus to go down through southern Texas into northern Mexico and all the way to Mexico City. I think on September the 26th or 27th, he arrives in Mexico City, checks in at the Hotel de Comercio, and then tries to go to both the Soviet and the Cuban embassies there to arrange for this in-transit visa to Russia from Cuba. He's totally unprepared for this. He doesn't have any of the paperwork, doesn't even have, according to Sylvia Duran, he had to go out and get a picture made of himself. And after going to the Russian embassy, and saying, well, look, you don't have anything close to stuff to get to Russia, he comes back to the Cuban embassy and he tries to lie to Sylvia Duran, who's the receptionist there, that everything is cleared at the Soviet embassy. She calls the Soviet embassy. They tell her, no, nothing is straightened out here. Okay? And Oswald leaves. Okay? Nobody knows because if you add up all the time he spent at those two embassies, and on the phone, it's like maybe at the most, 3 hours.
Right.
What did he do for all that other time that he was there?
There were allegedly several phone calls, and at least, according to some, he appeared there about 5 times in person.
There were 5 visits, right.
Right.
So what did he do all the other time that he was allegedly there? We really don't know. So when he goes ahead and finds out that he can't get anywhere, he can't do what he wanted to do, the Warren Commission says that he went ahead and got on a bus and went back through Mexico into Texas, and he arrives around on I think October the 3rd or October the 4th. Now, that's the Warren Commission. That's what they say happened. How did they base this information? Well, we found out, I think in 1994, when the Assassinations Record Review Board declassified something called the Slauson-Coleman Report, because these were 2 lawyers, Slauson and Coleman, who went to Mexico City at the suggestion of Richard Helms, the CIA director of plans at the time, and they went ahead and they tried to get the information about where Oswald was and what he did. They never even interviewed Sylvia Duran, if you can believe that, who's probably the most important witness, in the whole journey down there.
Well, yeah, okay? She was the one that was dealing with him most of the time.
Right. She dealt with him more than anybody else, okay? But they never interviewed her, all right? And so they came back and they filed a 30-page report which essentially said what the CIA and the FBI wanted them to say. That's what it said. Now, when the House Select Committee was formed in the 1970s, Eddie Lopez and Dan Hardway were assigned to reinvestigate Oswald in Mexico City. Their report, sometimes called the Lopez Report, is over 300 pages long. It was not declassified in toto until around 1998. And by the way, let me add a point here. Even today, in 2013, 50 years after Kennedy's assassination, it's still not totally declassified because there's a section in the report, an addendum, which is entitled, "Was Oswald an agent of the CIA?" And that is not there. Plus, the notes that Lopez and Hardaway took while putting together the report was taken by the CIA and never declassified either.
Yeah, we should point out that the Soviet and Cuban diplomatic compounds in Mexico City were thoroughly monitored by the CIA. I mean, you can understand why, obviously.
So, absolutely correct.
They would have possessed tape recordings, transcripts of all of Oswald's telephone calls if, in fact, he made them.
Right. Well, we're getting a little bit ahead of the story, but that's a good point you brought up. So, when this report... Oh, let me explain why it was classified. Okay, as I explain in my book. When Eddie and Danny and Robert Blakey, who was the second chief counsel of the House Select Committee. See, because Blakey had signed an agreement with the CIA and the FBI that they had the right to veto anything they did not want made public in the House Select Committee report or their accompanying volumes. Well, when I interviewed Eddie at his house up there in Rochester, New York, he said, Jim, the reason the report was not declassified at that time was because it took us like 4 hours to get through the first 8 sentences. The CIA objected to everything, and so Blakey kind of just threw in the towel. If you actually read the report, the first part of the report is a rather tedious and boring technical discussion. But the reason that it's like that is because Eddie and Danny, and this is why the CIA objected to this, Eddie and Danny were explaining in that first part of the report why it is so hard to believe that the CIA cannot produce a picture of Oswald going either into the Cuban embassy or the Russian embassy, because the whole first part of the report describes the 5 cameras that the CIA had monitoring the entrances to both buildings, one of which was actually a pulse-activated camera. And they explain this in about 2 pages, how this camera worked. Anytime there was a disturbance in the air, in the air density coming out of I think it was the Russian embassy, this camera was automatically triggered to take a photograph.
Now, we were talking about the surveillance cameras. And God knows there were many photographs to sift through, because as you just stated, James, that camera would, every time someone anyone in Mexico City coughed, that camera was snapping photographs. But before we get into that, let me just get you to explain very briefly, in a couple of sentences, why it's so crucial for, let's say, the Warren Commission and those who are intent on building this case against Oswald. Why it's so crucial for them to prove that it was Oswald in Mexico? Why is that important, that he was there?
Oh, well, because the whole Warren Commission story is that Oswald was some kind of commie sympathizer. That's at least. If you go with the really, the hard right guys in the CIA, Oswald was really supposed to be some kind of what they call sleeper agent. A sleeper agent is somebody, who comes back from a communist country, lies low, and then commits some terrible act. Having him be this commie sympathizer, and talking to these people at the Cuban consulate and the Russian consulate and trying to get to Cuba and then to the Soviet Union, that then would set him up as part of the motive for being this disgruntled communist sympathizer for killing Kennedy. And they added that, of course, to the stuff he did in New Orleans, like getting in the scuffle, with the Cuban exiles and getting arrested, etc. And this all, of course, then burst into the mainstream media, or what I like to call the controlled media, okay? As in the public consciousness was blasted that Oswald was a frustrated loner communist who killed Kennedy, and that was his motive. That's why it's important for him to be in Mexico City to doing those things.
Right. He's being very conspicuous, obviously, starting in the streets of New Orleans, as you say, distributing flyers in a very conservative city, and then, of course, a trip to Mexico, repeatedly trying to get back to Russia by way of Cuba. Now, back to these surveillance photographs. And I'm looking at one right here that is allegedly Oswald, that's taken by a surveillance camera outside the Soviet embassy. And clearly, if you look at it, it's not Oswald. This is supposedly Oswald. How many photographs did they actually have to sift through? Thousands, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. They were taking photographs all the time down there. And by the way, I think I know, is the picture you're looking at of this kind of big, husky football player-looking guy?
Yes.
With a crew. Okay. Now,
and he's got some sort of a satchel. He looks like he's...
That we learned in the Lopez report.
Okay.
The CIA sent that up to the Warren Commission, and that was supposed to be a picture of Oswald. Of course, once the Warren Commission got it, they realized, well, what the heck is this? They're not even sending us the right pictures. Okay, so they called it the Mystery Man photograph. And that was it. Can you believe that? That's all they said about it. It's a Mystery Man photograph, a man outside the Soviet consulate. This is how good the Lopez report was and why it had to be classified. Eddie Lopez and Dan Hardway figured out who that guy was. He was a Soviet diplomat.
He does look Slavic. That was my first impression. I looked at this guy and I thought, hey, that looks like Vladimir Putin or something. He looks Slavic.
Yeah, okay. They figured out who he was. And by the way, and this is how incriminating the Lopez report is, they said that the CIA, I don't know how deep you want to get into this. Can we talk about Ann Goodpasture?
Let's take a few minutes, sure. I don't, so take a few minutes and walk us through that.
Ann Goodpasture was the person in charge of both the photographs and the taping system at CIA Mexico City Station. She had the first crack at both the tapes and the photographs. She ostensibly worked for Winston Scott, who was a CIA station chief. But when I interviewed Eddie Lopez and I asked her who she was, said she handled all of David Phillips's operations down there because he was always flying around, to the JM Wave Station in Miami or to Langley, okay, or New Orleans or Texas, okay? So she ran his operations. He had a desk down there.
Let's just remind people who Phillips was again. We talked about him last week.
David Phillips is probably one of the most conspicuous people in this entire case. And it came to be the House Select Committee had very serious suspicions about him being involved in the JFK assassination because he had been seen with Oswald in Dallas in late August of 1963. It turns out him and Jim McCord were running the anti-Fair Play for Cuba Committee operation for the CIA. He had a desk in Mexico City about which he lied about, to the House Select Committee. And the assets that were sent to Mexico City to try and incriminate Oswald, well, Hardway and Lopez found out that every one of those assets traced back to Phillips, and then the coup de grace, as I have in my book, as he was dying, he had a conversation with his brother, James, who had always suspected that his brother was somehow involved, and his brother asked him, were you in Dallas the day Kennedy was killed? And Phillips, broke up weeping and admitted that he was. So he's a very, very suspicious character, okay, for all those reasons and even more. Well, it turns out Ann Goodpasture worked with David Phillips, and Hardway and Lopez figured out that she knew who that picture of really was. She knew it wasn't Oswald, but she knew who it really was, and she sent the picture up anyway. See, it was a very serious problem that they could not find a picture of Oswald with the kind of coverage that they had, and they made up every single kind of excuse for not having a picture of Oswald. And if you read the Lopez report, every one of those excuses falls by the wayside. Let's get to the other problem, the very serious problem. In the Lopez report, they actually declassify all the conversations that the CIA said Oswald had in both the Soviet consulate and the Cuban consulate, but they even went a step further. They talked to the people who actually did the translations. Now, there's a table in the Lopez report in which they describe every one of these conversations. When you read that table, it's very clear that not only did they not have a picture, they didn't have any tape recordings. Because in every single one, it says speaker spoke either poor broken Russian or fluent Spanish.
Wait a minute. Oswald, as we've learned, was very fluent in Russian. His Russian was remarkable.
It's the opposite.
He was remarkable.
Oswald spoke fluent Russian and lousy Spanish. So the question then becomes, well, wait a minute. First, you don't have any pictures. Now you're saying you don't have any tapes? Why don't you have any tapes? This guy's not Oswald.
Clearly.
Why don't you want to give us any of the tapes? Now, see, that threshold was never reached with the Warren Commission. It was never reached with the Warren Commission because the Warren Commission never, of course, printed any such table. They never got that far, and the Warren Commission never talked to the translators.
Let's go back to Sylvia Duran for a moment and the consular general at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. They supposedly, they would have dealt directly with Oswald. What did they say when they were shown pictures of what Oswald looked like and the person that they saw? Who did they describe?
Out of the 4 people that were interviewed, only one person said he saw Oswald. But the one person who said he saw Oswald had the worst view. He was way in the back in a doorway. All the people who were closest to and interacted with Oswald, like, for example, Askew and Duran, said that's not the guy we saw. And, in fact, when Sylvia Duran actually testified to the House Select Committee, she described the guy as being short and blonde. When they asked, well, how short was he? She said, about as tall as me. Well, she's about 5'6", okay? And he had blonde hair. Okay, now, Oswald, of course, was 5'9.5" and had brown hair, okay? So, obviously, the person she was talking to was not Oswald. Now, years later, Askew went on CBS television and turned over to one of their reporters the pictures inside the Cuban embassy of the guy he says presented himself as Oswald. Now, guess what? Do I really have to tell you what the pictures look like? It's a short guy with blonde hair.
There you go.
Okay. So this whole thing gets so fishy. You can see why the CIA did not want to deal with this with the Warren Commission. Because if all this would have come out in 1964, the Warren Commission would have had some serious, serious problems. Okay, why are they making up all this stuff about Oswald in Mexico City? And David Phillips, of course, later on, in a debate he did with Mark Lane at UCLA, said, when all the evidence is in, you will see that there simply is no evidence that Oswald was ever at the Russian embassy. Okay?
Okay, let me ask you then. Let me just, I don't want to get us off track here, but if Phillips or whoever was handling Oswald were able to, they were ordering him to New Orleans and said, go set up the Fair Play for Cuba committee, and, conspicuously, get in a fight and deliver and hand out leaflets on the city. Make yourself conspicuous. Why wouldn't they have, if they really wanted to pin this on Oswald, just have sent him down there, actually sent him down there, where he could have been photographed?
Okay, let me see if I understand the question. Okay, you're saying why wouldn't they send Oswald actually down to Mexico City and do those things? Is that what you were asking me?
If they're trying to set him up, why concoct this story that he went down there if he didn't and not be able to?
Well, I think the reason is that Oswald didn't want to go back to Russia. He would have asked too many questions.
Ah, okay, makes sense.
Wait a minute. I was already over there. I didn't like it. The Russians won't accept me as a true Marxist because I'm not. Okay. So why do you guys want to send me back there again?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you're ready for this, but I'd like to talk a little bit about Valery Kostakov. Can we go there? All right. So, supposedly, while Oswald was down there, whoever this person was masquerading as Oswald, and we'll get more into that, but Oswald supposedly contacts this Kostakov in Mexico City, who's supposedly with KGB's Department 13. Tell me a little bit about this Unit 13.
All right. According to the FBI and the CIA files, Department 13 was supposed to be the KGB Covert Action Department in the Western Hemisphere, which was responsible for, as people discuss it, liquidation jobs, which means, killing people, okay? And this information that Kostakov was supposed to be their representative under State Department cover in the Western Hemisphere, stationed in Mexico City, was very, very closely held, okay? As I describe in my book, according to the best evidence I could dig up, all right, the CIA kept this kind of very close to the vest until the day of the assassination.
So here we have Oswald sent, supposedly Oswald, down in Mexico City trying to obtain a visa to get back to the Soviet Union by way of Cuba, which of course makes perfect sense if you're trying to paint this guy as a commie simp and having a motive to kill the president. being portrayed as, soft on Castro and soft on Cuba and soft on communism. What better way then to have Oswald suddenly appear in Mexico City trying to get this visa? Only problem is they couldn't produce photographs of Oswald leaving either the Cuban or the Cuban or the Soviet embassy, nor could they produce phone calls, taped phone calls, keeping in mind, of course, the CIA had both of those embassies heavily surveilled during this time. So, as you can see, I mean, the case really starts to unravel at this point. Now, James, further to that, though, they really wanted to paint this picture of Oswald as a commie simp. They have him supposedly making a phone call to the Soviet embassy from the Cuban consulate and calling this Valery Kostakov, who is supposedly a KGB assassin. So let's delve into that a little bit.
All right. Well, first of all, let me explain why this phone call is so important. Because if you take a look at all the other tapes that were submitted and the transcripts, they don't have Oswald in direct contact with Kostakov. So now there is this supposedly final phone call from the Cuban embassy to the Soviet consulate in which Oswald is actually talking to Kostakov. The problem with this final piece of evidence is Sylvia Duran denies it ever took place, and her voice is actually on the tape. So she says, oh, wait. She says, hold it. Oswald never came back on the afternoon of the 27th. He was out of here before 12 o'clock. So I don't know where you guys got this phone call.
Yeah, I've heard
that phone call ever took place.
Now, could I just throw something in here, James, because I have a question for you about that. Now, I heard this phone call took place on a Saturday, and I heard that the Cuban consulate was closed on Saturdays.
Right. That's another reason that phone call is very, very hard to swallow. See, there's different testimony as to this, but they were not open a full day on Saturday. So either way, okay, that phone call is very, very suspicious in every single aspect. So as many people, including myself, have come to think, that phone call is really a double forgery. It's not just Oswald, it's also Duran's voice being forged on that tape. Now, as we mentioned earlier, why did the CIA go to those kinds of lengths to do this? Do you want to talk about what happens on a day of the assassination, or do you just want to... Because that's why this is so important.
Well, yeah, but before we get to that, I mean, I have another question that jumps out at me, and that is, if in fact the CIA had this information, these audio recordings, the transcripts, and they knew before Kennedy shows up in Dallas that Oswald, a known defector, is in Mexico City making contact with a KGB assassination guy, I would think they'd turn that immediately over to the FBI in Dallas.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that foreshadows what's going to happen on the 22nd. Now, in my opinion, and this is the argument I make in my book, the reason this was not made public, because let's go back a little bit. This is 7 weeks before the assassination. 7 weeks before the assassination. You would think somebody in the CIA would say, wait a minute, somebody has to get this information out there that this Oswald guy was somehow in Mexico City talking to Kostakov. And we know who Kostakov is. But somehow this information does not come to the forefront in those intervening 7 weeks. Hosty, the FBI guy, says, I never knew who this Kostakov guy was. They never told me. They only said he was a State Department employee. Okay? What the hell was I supposed to know?
Yeah, this is a recurring theme, isn't it? Even as late as the Boston bombing. One intelligence group saying we didn't get the handoff from the other intelligence group, and we're supposed to believe that this was all just some sort of a screw-up. Okay, so the FBI supposedly learns on the afternoon of the assassination it hadn't been kept fully informed by the CIA of Oswald's activities in Mexico City. So let's pick it up from there. What does it? I mean, how does the CIA explain this away?
Right. On the day of the assassination, in an after-action CIA report, it was revealed that the FBI called the agency when Oswald's name was first mentioned on the radio. That call was then passed on to James Angleton's office, and now Kostakov's true identity was revealed. So, in other words, this was being very, very closely held. The FBI calls the CIA. They're transferred over to Angleton's office. And now this information that had been so closely held is finally out into the system. Okay? And it causes a huge panic throughout the intelligence community because obviously the interpretation these guys will put on it is just what I said earlier. Was Oswald a sleeper agent sent back from the Russians after being turned into a KGB agent over there, laying low, and now meeting with Kostakov to get his assignment, which was to kill Kennedy? All right? You can imagine how these guys felt. All right? We blew it. We allowed President Kennedy to get killed.
Yeah, I can see how that would be pretty disconcerting. I mean, and the CIA obviously knowing that they don't have any proof that Oswald was down there. They hold it back. They want to pin this on Oswald, so they're not going to release it.
Let's take it one step further, because I know you read my book. What happened is that the CIA sent a tape up to Dallas the night of the assassination. Supposedly one of these tapes they had of Oswald in the Russian consulate, okay? The FBI agents hear it, and they write a memo to Hoover saying, we've just interrogated Oswald. We sat in on some of these interrogations of Oswald in Dallas. And this voice on the tape does not correspond to the guy we heard. So therefore, we don't think this is Oswald. Now, to take this one step further, on November the 23rd, okay, he gets this picture, okay, which of course is not Oswald. All right, and he has this conversation with Johnson saying, you know something's really funny here, because I got this report saying the voice on the tape is not Oswald. I got this picture that ain't Oswald. So there appears to be a second guy down there. Okay? All right? Now, after this, as you read in my book, on November the 24th, something unbelievable happens. Something really shocking happens. Everybody now goes through this dumb act that the tapes never existed. The tapes never existed. Okay? All we had was transcripts. Even though these guys in Dallas heard the tape. Okay? All right? Because now, of course, the CIA can't blow this and say, wait a minute. Were you impersonating Oswald in Mexico City? Because that's obviously what Hoover was thinking. Then 7 weeks later, Hoover writes on the side of this marginalia of this memo that I don't think we should trust the CIA anymore, because remember the snow job they gave us about Oswald in Mexico City. And by the way, if you read about the relationship between the CIA and the FBI, you'll see that it's this event that really begins to drive a wedge, okay, between the two agencies. You know, it was over the Kennedy assassination, the Mexico City thing, and the whole Kostakov, not the Kostakov thing, but the Nosenko thing, which we haven't talked about yet.
No.
Okay? So this is what happens with these tapes, okay, on the day of the assassination. Very, very interesting.
To say the least. Now, just to jump ahead, though, was there not supposedly a recording of the telephone call between Hoover and Johnson in which they discussed the possibility of an imposter in Mexico City?
Well, do you know the story behind that?
I believe there was a documentary made about it, and there's something about a 14-minute gap in that tape.
Right. Okay. There supposedly was a phone call about this. Okay, but guess what? We don't actually have the phone call. All we have is a transcript. Okay, and there's a 14-minute gap. Okay, in the tapes in which suddenly we don't hear these guys talking anymore. Okay. all we're supposed to believe is a transcript we have of this. Now, of course, for someone like you or someone like me, considering we know how important this is in the history of the United States, this phone call between Hoover and Johnson, okay, that's a very, very interesting exception. The obvious question is, why? And why did the Warren Commission and why did the House Select Committee never get to the bottom of this? What exactly happened to those 14 minutes? Why aren't they there? And why is it so convenient, okay, at such a crucial time?
If there was, this impersonator, was this, as far as how did the CIA or the Warren Commission attempt to explain this? Did they just say, Oswald must have sent someone down to impersonate him? Is that how they tried to explain this?
No, the Warren Commission never explained it.
They didn't.
The Warren Commission never got that far. The Warren Commission never questioned what the CIA's materials were, okay? They went along with what the CIA said happened. Now, the House Select Committee, okay, they went a lot deeper. But their actual report, plus I think they had 12 volumes, never goes into all this stuff. Never goes in because the Lopez report was classified. So they never delve into all these different problems, okay, with the real story. See, what I'm telling you right now, okay, on this conversation, did not become public knowledge until the 1990s, okay? Prior to this, the closest you got to it was Anthony Summers' book, Conspiracy, okay, which delved into Mexico City a little bit. And up until the 90s was probably the best information that we had. And he did explain a little bit of this stuff. But since he didn't have the Lopez report, he really couldn't go into any depth about it. So what I'm telling you in this phone call is stuff that we got in 1997. Isn't that pathetic?
It is.
Isn't that sickening?
Here's the other thing.
We had to wait 34 years to find out the truth about Mexico City. And tell me there wasn't a cover-up.
Right.
When you got to wait 34 years to find out that the CIA is lying, and it's too late to ask anybody, well, how come you were lying? Okay. And James Angleton, when Winston Scott dies, okay, flies down so fast to Mexico City that he forgot his passport, goes into his widow's house, threatens her with her pension benefits, and basically scoops everything out of his safe, puts it in a valise, sends a messenger team back to take everything else out, and flies back to Langley to make sure that nobody's ever going to know the truth about Oswald or Oswald not being in Mexico City. Well, I think to call us a little paranoid is ridiculous. If you don't think there's something suspicious about that, something's wrong with you.
Well, here's the other thing. Even if people listening to this program are still convinced that Oswald pulled the trigger, here's the thing. If there was someone down in Mexico, and let's say Oswald did it, that means, and we know it wasn't Oswald, that means Oswald had at least one accomplice. So there, from that standpoint, that proves there was a conspiracy. If he had one other person, if he had one other accomplice down there, that means Oswald was part of a greater conspiracy. There's no other way of getting around it. Yes.
He was being aided and abetted.
Right. Or if he's being impersonated then without his knowledge. Same thing. He's a victim then in this case, part of a greater conspiracy. There's no other way around it.
I would say that's correct. Let me say something else, because there's a small part of the story that we haven't told.
Yeah, we have about 3 minutes, so yes.
Okay, according to the Lopez report, this guy went to the National University and talked to a student there. Okay? Well, guess what? When the House Select Committee interviewed this student that Oswald allegedly talked to, showed him a picture of Oswald, he says that's not him either. Okay? So, in other words, it's almost a blank slate. And then you got to ask the question, why?
Well, and I think you answered it. You answered it off the top. They wanted to. If they're going to hang this thing on Oswald, you got to make him. You got to turn him into a communist sympathizer. You got to send someone down to Mexico City to get this visa to have him in contact with this KGB assassin. Had this come out in 1964, how do you think the Warren Commission would have dealt with it? I know I'm asking you to speculate, but
I really don't know how they would have dealt with it. I mean, I think, knowing what I know about the Warren Commission, they would have lied about it. But the problem they would have had then is, how are we going to bury the information? Do we dare print the information if we're going to try and cover it up? That would have been a real problem. Because somebody obviously reading the volumes would have found out, wait a second, they're full of baloney. Oswald wasn't there.
I suppose they could have tried to stick Oswald's head on somebody's body. Lord knows they've tried that before. So listen, James, this is fascinating. This is an important chapter. I think people tend to gloss over. Okay, he went down to Mexico City. He was down there for a couple of weeks. He tried to get a visa. He didn't get it. He came back. This is crucial. I mean,
well, see, there's about 20 pages on this in my book, but it could have easily been longer. It could have, with all we know about Mexico City. I mean, it really is an utter enigma of what the hell happened down there. To this day, nobody can figure out exactly what happened down there.
Well, clearly Oswald wasn't down there. I think that much.
I don't think so. No.
No, I think that much we do know.
Let's put it this way: if he was there, he did not do what the CIA and the Warren Commission said he did.
Hey, it's Friday. That means a visit from the real John Constantine, Christian DiEugenio from Paranormal Contractors, a division of crime and trauma scene cleaners. Christian, welcome back. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well, Richard.
Hey, let's dip into some case files. You have a recent one in the Greater Toronto area. What's happening?
We have a job site that is going on right now that entails a post-mortem of, I would say, approximately 10 weeks. It's quite the situation.
Now, when you say a post-mortem of 9 weeks, what do you mean? The body has been decomposing or was found decomposing in a house?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. It's what's referred to as a decomposition, and a post-mortem decomposition where the deceased was there for a prolonged period of time. Now, with that being said, I mean, everything in that environment is completely destroyed, is in regards to odor, in regards to insect infestation, contamination from bodily fluids. In this particular case, the deceased had solidified as a result of the level of human fat during the decomposition, had solidified right to the floor. And with that being said, we have a crew decontaminating and remediating the particular environment right now because it's quite extensive. Everything from the HVAC system to the integrity of the physical structure, such as the floors and the walls, it's all been contaminated with different type of gases and infestation. So with that being said, just recently, as recent as I believe this week, a few days ago, in the room where the deceased was found, so I believe it's fair to say that the room where the deceased died, of course, while our technicians were in that room and decontaminating all surfaces and aspects and elements within that room, the entire environment for that matter, all of a sudden, I mean, no electrical equipment on our end was on. However, the lights were flickering while we were removing the structure where part of his body was attached to at that exact same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you do a test to make sure that the main fuse box was operating correctly? Did you do any sort of verification?
Well, you know what? It's funny that you say that, because after that this situation happened, they did in fact go around to both upstairs and downstairs throughout the home and try all the switches and make sure that there were no faulty light bulbs, that all the fuses were intact. The fuse box was in fact intact. We also checked the light bulb in that room, and it was completely tight. It wasn't loose. There was no reason to believe that there's a shortage in that particular in the room where the deceased was. Now, the other funny thing is that in another part of the home, that there was a radio that was on, and the radio started giving incredible loud white noise, salt and pepper white noise while this was happening. So it's quite interesting how, as I previously mentioned to you in other shows, that entities have an amazing ability to manipulate electronics. And this is a scientific proven fact. And this just validates what I've told you before in regards to spiritual manipulation of electronics.
Fascinating case. Christian, give us a 1-866 number if people need to get a hold of you.
1-866-724-0800, or you can contact us at paranormalcontractors@gmail.com, or one step further, you can visit us at crimescenecleaners.ca.
Christian, always a pleasure. We'll talk to you next Friday.
Thanks a lot, Richard. Take care.
Christian DiEugenio, the real John Constantine of Paranormal Contractors, a division of crime and trauma scene cleaners. Check out their YouTube channel, Paranormal Contractors, for things that go bump in the night.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? No, me either. But I guess you better say it because of Richard, he's all wrapped up in this stuff. Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Serrett.
JFK assassination researcher and author James DiEugenio is here.
When I met you in that hotel in L.A., you had me totally enthralled with this. And this has to do with what we'll call, I guess, the mystery of the mail-order murder weapon. The Carcano rifle that was allegedly used to fell the president. Now, the weapon, supposedly, according to the Warren Commission, was ordered by Oswald when? March of 1963?
Yes.
Now,
Oh, no. It was actually ordered earlier than that. It arrived in March of 1963.
All right. Now,
Okay.
assuming that Oswald did order that rifle, I mean, for what purpose? Because he wouldn't have, it hadn't been announced that Kennedy was coming to Texas, to Dallas. What would the thinking have been there? Why would he have ordered that rifle?
Well, that's a good question, because here, see, in Oliver Stone's movie, he brings up the question, why would you go ahead and mail order a rifle when you could buy one in Dallas, Fort Worth area over the counter, which really would be very difficult to trace? But there's an even better question. If Oswald ordered that rifle, I'm sure most of your listeners know that Oswald was arrested in New Orleans in August of 1963. This was when he got in this altercation with Carlos Brignier, of the DRE, and they were arrested for disturbing the peace.
This is when Oswald is delivering flyers for Fair Play for Cuba.
Yeah, he's handing out flyers on the street.
Right.
Okay. Now, he then gets arrested, and he then, instead of paying the bail money, which I think was $25, he actually wanted to spend some time in a cell, all right? And he asked to be interviewed by an FBI agent. Now, just think about that for a minute. What kind of communist goes to jail and asks to be interviewed by an FBI agent? But anyway, he was. Now, when he was arrested, he supposedly turned over to FBI agent Quigley an ID card with the name Alec Heidel on it.
Right, A. Heidel.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, follow this very clearly. This is August. This is like the third week of August. Okay? Kennedy is going to be killed in 3 months. Okay? According to the Warren Commission, Oswald ordered that rifle under the name of Alec Heidel.
Yeah.
Who on earth could be that stupid?
Right.
In other words, the FBI now knows how to trace the rifle because you gave them a card with that name on it, and then you're dumb enough to use that rifle to kill Kennedy?
Right.
See, these kind of things don't happen in the real world. Okay? They don't happen in real life. Very, very seldom do criminals make it that easy. Okay? Are they that stupid? Right? See, this makes absolutely no sense. And for a long time, People just accepted that that was Oswald's rifle for a long time. And because people kind of get the first generation of critics in this case, like Josiah Thompson, Sylvia Marr, Mark Lane, Harold Weisberg, they accepted certain things. Okay? For example, they accepted, most of them, that Oswald went to Mexico City. Okay?
Which we discussed last.
Complete baloney.
Right.
Okay. They accepted, for example, the story about, Wesley Frazier, that the curtain rod story. They accepted the story of Marion Baker, that's the cop who pulled up in his motorcycle, ran up the stairs. He says he saw Oswald at this soda machine on the second floor drinking a Coke. They accepted those things, which are all questionable today. Those are all questionable today.
Yes.
I would say all three things are wrong. Okay? And they also accepted this, that somehow Oswald ordered that rifle, which today I'm certain was wrong.
Walk us through this. Oswald supposedly takes out a post office box in Dallas under the name of, was it under the name of A. Heidel or under the name of Oswald?
Oh, no, that's one of the big problems. One of the very big problems with this, which in my opinion sinks it, is that he did not take it out in the name of Heidel. He took it out in his name. Okay? Now, but before we get to that, let's talk about, there's two parts to this transaction. There's the part about sending it in, and there's the part about delivering it. Okay? So let's concentrate first on the sending part. Okay? Because there's just as many problems with the sending part as there is in the delivery part.
Right.
Although to me, it's the delivery part which sinks the whole thing.
But you're talking about now buying and mailing the money order. Buying and mailing the money order.
Okay, so let's concentrate on that. But first of all, I think you know, and I think most of your listeners know, that this was not the first rifle reported. You know that, don't you?
The first rifle what do you mean?
This was not the first rifle reportedly found on the 6th floor.
Yes. They talked about another type of weapon. Was it a Mauser?
It was a 7.65 Mauser.
Yes.
Okay. That was the first weapon. And there's 3 affidavits in the Warren Commission volumes that say that. Okay? So right then and there's a problem. Okay? Because it's literally impossible to think that 3 cops could mistake the Mauser for the Mannlicher-Carcano for the simple reason that the Mannlicher-Carcano rifle has stamped right on it 6.5 caliber made in Italy. How on earth could you mistake a 6.5 made in Italy for a 7.65 made in Germany Mauser? That's just idiotic. Okay? So what happened is that as the hours and the days wore on, the 7.65 Mauser disappeared. Okay? And it was replaced by this 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher-Carcano rifle. Okay? And that as the hours wore on, into the next day and the day after that, there began to be this so-called paper trail that said Oswald had ordered this rifle through clients in Chicago. He had picked it up at the post office. This was the rifle that he then took to New Orleans with him, and this is the rifle that was stored in the Payne's garage, and this is the rifle that he put together this package with, and this is the weapon that he had in his brown paper pouch, and he took on that morning to the Texas School Book Depository, hid for several hours, and then shot Kennedy with it. Okay? All right. Now, for many years, many years, people swallowed this. Okay? Now, let's explain in today's research with the declassified files of the ARB why this story does not hold water. Okay?
And just a heads up, James, this is a short segment, so it will get just a few minutes.
Story.
Yeah.
Oswald was supposed to have ordered this on a weekday while he was at work. Okay? Now, go ahead and check his time cards at Jagger Child Stovall and see if he missed any of work that morning, because he did not.
I got it right here in front of me. He checked in at 8 o'clock, and worked right until 3:10 that day.
Right, and there's even summaries of what he did, because on that job you had to write summaries of what you did. Now, the Warren Commission says that even though what those time cards say, they're wrong, because on that day he actually left work without telling his supervisor. He went down to the post office, which I think is about 8 or 9 blocks away. He purchased a money order, okay? But, now get this, he didn't mail the money order at the post office. He walked about another mile out of his way and dropped the money order in an envelope in a post box, okay, in a mailbox. Now, how do we know that? Because of the number on the envelope, okay? Back in those days, you didn't have zip codes, so that when they picked up mail, they did it by what they called zone numbers.
Right.
Okay? All right. So, here's the first problem. A, how the hell did Oswald leave work without anybody knowing he left work? And B, why on earth would you not drop a money order off, okay, at the post office where you bought it and go out of your way to drop it in a mailbox? Why would you do such a thing? Okay? All right. Now, let's go to the next step. If you saw the Warren Commission, Oswald mailed this thing from Dallas, okay? It got to Chicago at Klein's and was deposited into their account in 24 hours. This is over 700 miles away.
That's pretty good even with today with FedEx.
I live in L.A., okay? There's sometimes I mail stuff that doesn't get within the city in one day. And today, we do have zip codes, and we do have computers. It's a whole different world. But they want you to believe that not only did it get mailed in one day, it got deposited in one day.
On this particular day, we've got his time card here, Commission Exhibit number 1855. He did not punch out. And yet we're led to believe that around, I guess, 10:30 or so.
Yeah, around that time. Yeah, around 9:45 or 10 o'clock.
He left
because that letter had to have been mailed by 11.
Right,
okay?
Because that's when it's stamped.
Yeah.
And so he leaves, supposedly, walks 8-9 blocks to the post office, buys the money order, and then walks another mile to a different postal zone to mail it. And then comes back to work. That probably would have taken him at least an hour, I'm guessing.
I would say about an hour, yeah.
Yeah, and yet nobody notices he's missing, and his time card is filled out, and he accounts for that time in his time card. So anyway, so that's
okay. Now we're going to get to the other oddity. How the heck this transaction was completed in 24 hours? Okay, so we have to believe the following: somebody. The route carrier picked up the mail from that mailbox, brought it to the central Dallas-Fort Worth post office. They sorted it all out, put it on the right plane. The plane then flew to Chicago, and then it has to be sorted out at the other end, at the central post office. And then it has to be routed to the proper route carrier. Okay? The route carrier then goes ahead and drops it off at Klein's. And then it had to be sorted at Klein's because Klein's was one of the major mail order houses in America.
Sure.
They sorted out everything according to check, money order, cash, etc. Okay? They then sorted it out there, okay? And then they walked it over to their Bank of Chicago, and then it was put in their account. And this happened within 24 hours. I say to you, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, this is 50 years ago. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to do that today, as you say, with computers and FedEx and UPS and so forth.
Everything was done by hand. Okay? Now, you're going to tell me they could do something like that within 24 hours. I don't buy it.
Well, let's suppose they did. Miracle of miracles, they did.
Okay, now let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next miracle, because we're going to be counting the miracles, okay? And you have to be, I'll tell you, you have to be like one of the great saints of the Catholic Church to believe all these miracles happen, okay? All right. Now, the next miracle, if you follow the money order, which they have pictures of in the Warren Commission, you will see that it never went through the Federal Reserve System. See, all of Oswald's other checks and those things that are in the Warren Commission that they put in there, you'll see that they all have, I believe, 3 or 4 stamps, because whenever you pass a check through, it goes through the Federal Reserve System, and it ends up at a central bank in the area, and it's stamped through by all the other institutions as it goes through the Federal Reserve System. If you go ahead and look at Oswald's checks, you will see that they have those stamps on them. You look at this, it doesn't have anything.
Yeah, other than the Klein stamp, I think, on the back.
Right, right.
And then it ends up in the National Bank, but no other stamps.
There's no other stamps on it. Okay, there's no other stamps on it. So how on earth did it ever get cashed? Something else. If you go ahead and look at the money order number, and you take a look at how many money orders they were selling, that money order is out of order. Okay, at the rate that they were selling them each week. Okay? All right.
Right, okay.
Okay. Now, that's the problem with sending it. Now, let's talk about the other end, the delivery. Okay? There were 2 or 3 regulations that in order to ship firearms at that time, Kleins had to follow. Okay? Number 1, it was called a 2195 form. All right? There had to be proof of this. Okay, a form had to be mailed along with the rifle, and this had to be filled out as to some kind of a proof of character of the recipient. And back in those days, it was something like, we want to send one of these right-wing maniacs, okay, who might take a shot at somebody, okay? Well, Oswald never filled one of those out, okay? But secondly, the other one is that when you ever mail a firearm, okay, or even a package to a P.O. box, the name has to match, okay, the name on the P.O. box form. Well, this didn't.
The name on the P.O. box form was Oswald, but he ordered it under his alias, A. Heidel.
He ordered under. So now, in that regulation, okay, it states specifically that if this rule is not followed, okay, if the name does not match, the post office must return to sender. Package must be marked return to sender and mailed back. Okay. Further, the application form has to be kept for 2 years. Now, I know this for a fact because I had this kind of a problem with the post office. Okay? And they keep these things for 3 years for that specific reason, because they do not want to be caught giving merchandise to the wrong person. Because on the form, if you authorize anybody to go ahead and take that and take merchandise and it goes to the wrong person, that's what saves them, because you actually wrote down they can give it to somebody else.
Right.
So the application, now follow what I'm saying. If you believe the Warren Commission, the application was kept except for that part. In other words, the part where it authorizes anybody else to receive mail, that wasn't kept. Now, on Oswald's New Orleans application, P.O. Box, it was kept. It was kept. Okay? But somehow in Dallas, it was not. So the Warren Commission tried to say Dallas was breaking regulations, which is an absolute lie. Okay? All right? New Orleans broke the regulation, but not Dallas, which is a lie. Dallas ditched a third part. Okay? They deliberately ditched a third part. Okay? Because they knew that if Heidel's name was on that post office box form, they had a serious problem. Okay? They had a really serious problem if his name isn't there. The question being, how the hell did Oswald ever get that rifle?
Right, because they can't.
Never gotten that far.
Again, the rifle was ordered under Heidel's name, delivered to Lee Harvey Oswald's post office box.
If you look very carefully in the Warren Commission volumes, okay, it says that dealing with certain aspects of the investigation, I think it's in volume 25, okay, where it actually says that the FBI investigated this and Heidel's name was not on the form. Okay? Because the FBI has informants at all these P.O. boxes. Okay?
Right.
All right. So now, another problem. No person at the post office ever remembered giving that box, that package to Oswald. Okay? Now, let me ask a question. If you had gone through this process by giving this big package from Klein's to Oswald, and he had to have shown you then that he was really Heidel, because that's the name the package was in. And no low-level postal employee is going to do something like that without checking with his advisor. Okay? If a guy has an alias that proves that he's really this other guy, okay, you're not going to let him do that with just you. You're going to bring the supervisor. Is this okay? He's really this guy. No employee of the post office remember doing that. And you would have.
Right.
I mean, especially when you saw Oswald's picture on TV. Okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay? Oh, my God. That's the guy I gave the rifle to. That's the guy. Okay? All right. Now, one other thing. They could never find the specific deposit in the bank records for that transaction. They went all through Klein's records, and they could never pinpoint the exact deposit. And in fact, at one time, they actually had the transaction as being in February, which was the wrong month. And there was actually a bank deposit slip that actually said it took place in February.
Right.
They could never track and pinpoint which one of the deposits that Klein's was. And in my opinion, the reason they could never do it is because Oswald never sent that money order.
And there's one other thing, and that is that the weapon that was supposedly ordered, was it not
It's the wrong rifle.
It was a 40-inch, and the murder weapon was a 36-inch.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's the wrong rifle.
Explain that.
The rifle in evidence that the Warren Commission says that was used in the crime is not the rifle that they said Oswald ordered.
What did he supposedly order, a 36 or a 40-inch?
Okay, he supposedly ordered a 36-inch short rifle. Okay? No, excuse me, a 36-inch carbine. The rifle found that the Warren Commission says that was used in the crime was a 40-inch short rifle. Okay? A carbine is even shorter than a short rifle. Okay? All right. A long rifle is usually like 46 inches. This was classified as a short rifle. So in other words, it was the wrong length and it was the wrong classification. Okay? Now, you ought to hear these guys try and explain this. Okay? You ought to hear them try and explain this. Okay, that it's the wrong rifle. Okay? I mean, it gets ridiculous with these arguments. All right? See, if you follow this transaction all the way through, and by the way, we can go back even further, you know, if you really want to. You can go all the way back to the boat that carried the rifles over from Italy.
Yeah, these were manufactured these were manufactured about 1940, I think.
Yeah, right. See, you cannot track the rifle in the packaging from Klein's because there's important stuff that's missing. Okay? You know, you can't even show where that actual package of rifles ever was. It was at this warehouse in New Jersey before it went to Klein's. So after going through all this, you know, and then there's the thing about Marina when she was being interviewed by the Secret Service.
Marina Oswald, yeah.
Yeah. She said, I never saw Lee with a rifle with a scope.
Right.
She said that in one of her first Secret Service interviews. So if you put all this back to back to back to back, and for a long time, you know, people just accepted that that was Oswald's rifle.
Always a pleasure, Jim.
Okay, we'll see you.
All right, before I dim the lights in my little studio beneath the stairs, I'll be back with a word on what's coming up next. Friends, I need your help. I need your support. I think you can well imagine how much time and energy goes into producing 3 episodes of Conspiracy Unlimited every week on top of my weekly radio program, The Conspiracy Show. It's just me and 2 volunteers, Ryan and Albert. And I can't continue to ask for them to work for free. And I can't continue to produce all of this great content unless we start generating some real revenue, and fast. So, I'd like those of you who listen regularly to think about becoming official supporters. Check out our page on patreon.com. Patreon.com/The Conspiracy Show. Patreon.com/The Conspiracy Show. There are 3 different tier levels, but you can give whatever you can. Just figure out what Conspiracy Unlimited and The Conspiracy Show mean to you and give what you can. Depending on the tier level, you could qualify to participate in exclusive monthly online video chats with me, or a chance to win Conspiracy Show and Conspiracy Unlimited merch. Patreon.com/The Conspiracy Show. Your help is urgently needed. Next time on Conspiracy Unlimited, the final chapter in my JFK assassination series, in conversation with James DiEugenio. Until then, I'm Richard Serrett. So long for now.